December 21st, 1944. On the snow-choked Ridge Road, 3 kilometers west of Bastogne, Ardennes, Belgium. The cold hit like a blade. Frost knifed the fabric of uniforms. Breath came out in white, ragged curtains that clung to the men's faces and to the iron of their rifles. Hauptmann Heinrich Vogt's leather gloves were numb where they gripped the binoculars. The lenses fogged with each exhale. He stood half inside a hedgerow, the dark of fir trees behind him, a shell-pitted hedgerow in front. Snow lay heavy in the field. Tracks cut like gray scars through the white, and every sound, the distant rumble of tracked vehicles, the cough of a half-frozen engine, the metallic ping of ice loosening off an eavestrough, felt magnified in the still winter air. Vogt smelled gasoline and stale tobacco and the faint, clinical tang of radio condensers. He had been a company commander long enough to know when a victory tasted odd, when the map on a table had too many arrows going the wrong way. Earlier that morning, his men had taken a narrow lane in a small firefight. An American convoy had been stalled, the lead vehicle disabled by a Panzerfaust. The rest had scattered. Some men fled into the trees, others lay down and waited in the snow. Vogt had sent 2 squads to clear the road. When they returned, they brought with them a canvas-covered Dodge and 3 young GIs, eyes wide, hands still trembling where they had held their helmets. The truck sat now with one wheel sunk into a drift, canvas flapping from the rear like a wounded lung. Its paint, where not dulled by mud, still shone olive drab beneath the frost. Vogt inspected it slowly, with the clinical attention of a man who had to judge not only its immediate value, but what its capture might mean. A radio mast lay collapsed across the canvas, coils of heavy, insulated cable like a tangle of sleeping serpents. Inside the cab, through an open flap, he could see the bulky silhouette of equipment. Racks, dials, meters with glass faces. A web of wiring that spoke of faces bent into impossible nights, of orders sent and received in the dark. The Americans, Corporal James Mac McKenna, Private First Class Louis Rivera, and a radio operator whose dog tags read W.H. Carter, had been disarmed and bundled to a cold corner. Their breath smoked, their hands trembled as much from adrenaline as from the cold. McKenna kept staring at the hedgerow where one of Vogt's men had been killed that morning, as if that might explain the sudden calculus of war itself. Vogt watched them for a long moment, the small human faces framed against the mechanical heart of the truck, and made the decision he would later call reckless and, in a quieter voice, necessary. "Bring me the set," he said in a low voice, and his radio operator, a wiry Feldwebel named Klaus Richter, pried open the back. The canvas smelled of oil and perspiration and the faint, antiseptic tang of stored batteries. Inside, beneath, a dusting of snow, lay the transmitter, a heavy, boxy block of metal with a brass tag and a dozen neatly labeled connectors. There were logbooks strapped to a side rack, paper edges browned and corners curled by use. A scrap of a cigarette butt tucked into one of the pages. The frequency markers were stamped in neat American script. The dials could be turned, the tuning knobs chewed from hours of work. Vogt put his hands on the set like a priest might on an altar. He felt no reverence, only an urgent curiosity that was almost hunger. Richter fed the battery packs into the unit. Another man ran a field telephone line from the set to a captured generator. Inside the little cab, the world shifted. A light flickered on. The receiver hummed, low and promising. For a moment, the only sound was the gentle thrum of current and the distant crack of artillery like a giant knocking at the sky. At first it was static, a white noise like distant surf. Then a voice rose through, clipped and military, but layered with a precision of coordination that made Vogt's jaw tighten. They were not speaking in isolated bursts. They were a machine speaking in parts. Convoy 9-2, passing Junction 5, ETA, 0900. Supply elements proceed as scheduled. A map of commands unfolded in Vogt's mind. Not written, but living in the cadence of those sentences. Trucks, fuel, medevac, infantry pockets converging like iron on clay. He glanced at the logbook. Times, unit numbers, grid references. The handwriting was steady, practiced. Vogt felt, in that moment, something colder than the frost. The transmissions were not incidental chatter. They were the arterial conversation of an army on the move. Not a handful of units improvising, but a broad coordinated flow. He heard references to railheads, to replenishment points, to corps-level timing. Men were being moved as if along invisible rails, supplies staged like clockwork at points miles behind the lines. He listened as a cheerful-sounding sergeant barked a timetable for fuel trucks that would refuel armor columns at dawn, as a calm, measured voice coordinated the arrival of fresh rifle companies to relieve exhausted men in a pocket. Around him, the captured Americans stared at their own radio, stunned into an impotent silence. Vogt's fingers hovered above a map in the truck's glove box. He almost laughed at the absurdity of reaching for paper. Outside, the Ardennes seemed endless, white and patient. But inside that cramped cab, the world had narrowed to graphite lines and frequencies, to a rhythm that spelled logistics, not merely men, but meals, bullets, petrol, and the ability to move them by the thousand. For a long minute, Vogt did not let the others speak. He forced himself to catalog every phrase, every code. He thought of his own HQ, of ration lists and cramped supply schedules, of rail cars that never arrived on time. He felt how the scale of what he heard made his own handful units look like splinters against a tide. The war, which until that morning had been a contest measured in small victories and stubborn defenses, suddenly presented itself as a ledger written in numbers too large to be countered by courage alone. He sat back, shoulders moving with the slow exhale of a man who had swallowed a bitter truth. Around him the snow kept falling, soft as oblivion, and the radio continued to talk, indifferent and inexorable. The next transmission crackled through the speaker, louder now, clearer, as if the voice itself had stepped into the cramped truck with them. Red Ball resupply rolling, heavy armor prioritized. Medical evac confirmed at checkpoint Delta. Richter looked up sharply. Even he, with only a corporal's understanding of logistics, recognized the significance of the words. Red Ball. That was the American supply artery, the one German intelligence had only heard rumors about. The one said to move mountains of fuel and ammunition with a precision Germany had never matched even at its operational peak. Vogt leaned closer, his breath fogging the cold metal beside the set. The voice went on. Repeat, 21 fuel trucks already inbound. 30 more logged. Sherman units to regroup near Bastogne sector by nightfall. 30 fuel trucks. Vogt closed his eyes for a moment, not from fatigue but from something heavier pressing inward. His company had been allotted one fuel truck for the offensive's opening push. They had siphoned the rest from abandoned villages, captured depots, tanks knocked out in the mud. A scavenger's war. And here the Americans were, discussing fuel in platoons of trucks, with the casual tone of a man ordering breakfast. He opened his eyes again. Snowflakes drifted through the cracked canvas as if trying to settle on the equipment. He brushed one off the tuning dial. Richter, he murmured. Mark the coordinates they're giving. Everyone. Richter's pencil scratched across a captured American map tacked onto a wooden crate. The paper rustled with each breath of wind. Vogt watched the pencil move, watched the marks expand outward, watched the pattern emerge. Convoys here. Replacement battalions there. engineering units repairing roads, artillery battalions being repositioned with logistical escort. Each mark was a bead of steel on a wire, together forming a shape that now appeared unmistakably clear. The Allies were not reacting to the German breakthrough. They were absorbing it. The captured Americans sat nearby, silent. Rivera leaned slightly forward, his breath shivering the air. "Sir," Richter said quietly, "they're coordinating 4 divisions worth of movement, all at once." Vogt didn't respond. His fingertips pressed lightly against the spokes of the tuning dial, the cold metal anchoring him to the present. Another broadcast came in, this time rapid fire, from somewhere deeper behind American lines. "Bastogne corridor holding, weather expected to clear within 48 hours, air resupply scheduled." Air resupply. There was the final stone. When the American voice said it, it was merely another logistical announcement. But to Vogt, it landed like a hammer. Germany's last winter offensive, Hitler's desperate throw of the dice, depended on fog, cloud cover, and the grounded aircraft that came with them. The Germans had banked the entire Ardennes operation on weather being their shield. But the Americans weren't speaking as if the skies might clear. They were planning for it. Vogt swallowed hard, the inside of his throat burning from the cold. In his mind, he saw it. C-47s sliding through open skies, parachutes blossoming like flowers over Bastogne, crates of ammunition tumbling onto Allied positions that Germany had spent everything to try to break. Behind him, one of his grenadiers muttered, "They move like they already know we're coming." Vogt didn't correct him. It wasn't that the Americans knew. It was that they didn't have to fear it. Their ability to shift entire regiments overnight made any German breakthrough a temporary inconvenience. He turned back to the prisoners. McKenna looked up, meeting Vogt's eyes. Not with defiance, but with a strange, resigned clarity. A man who knew what Vogt was only now understanding. "You see it now," McKenna murmured quietly, his breath trembling. "Don't you?" A German sergeant stepped forward, rifle rising. But Vogt motioned him back, because yes, he did see it. He saw it in the cold numbers, in the calm American voices, in the way the radio spoke as if nothing the Germans did could meaningfully alter the flow of the broader war. The Ardennes offensive, this last gamble. It was like trying to stop a river with bare hands. For a long time, Vogt said nothing. Snow collected on his shoulders and melted in tiny rivulets down his collar. The radio hummed its steady, arrogant hum, the sound of a war machine too large to silence, too coordinated to disrupt, too rich in resources to exhaust. Inside this truck, he realized, was not just intelligence. It was a window into inevitability. And outside, the Ardennes forest stood silent, the trees like mute witnesses to a truth that had finally found him. For almost an hour, the radio poured out its cold, methodical truth. Unit codes, rendezvous points, supply timetables, a lattice of orders so vast it made the cramped interior of the truck feel even smaller, like Vogt and his men had stumbled into the beating heart of a giant. Outside, the afternoon dimmed, the sun sinking behind the ridge. The snow thickened into slow, drifting veils. Men's boots crunched softly as they paced, rifles slung, breath rising like smoke from chimneys. Inside, Hauptmann Vogt still listened. He didn't lean against the wall. He didn't remove his gloves. He barely blinked. What he heard was not a simple military network. It was a civilization at war. A voice came through, calm and brisk. 4th Armored pushing west. Expect link-up within 36 hours. Engineering Corps clearing Route N at 0500 hours. Additional Sherman groups diverting around German armor concentrations. Richter, who had been copying notes, dropped his pencil. It tapped against the floor, rolled until it hit a coil of radio cable, and stopped. 36 hours, Richter whispered. They'll reopen the Bastogne corridor by then. Vogt nodded slowly. He didn't blame Richter for the shock. Their own briefing had claimed the same would take weeks, if it happened at all. Now the Americans spoke of it like a scheduled appointment. A gust of wind rocked the truck. Canvas flapped. Snow spilled inward. Vogt didn't react. His mind had begun sorting through the puzzle pieces. Fuel shortages, stalled armor, broken roads, units fighting with half their strength. Even the initial surprise of the offensive had been bought with the last reserves of their strength. But this was something altogether different. Another broadcast flowed in. Medical trains arriving at Rail Hub Juliet. Evacuations to commence at 2300. Civilian refugees rerouted to temporary shelters. Civilian shelters. Medical trains. An army that could process not only the wounded, but refugees in the middle of a counter-offensive. That was not an army scrambling to survive. That was an army with infrastructure layered behind it like geological strata. Vogt exhaled, the breath shivering out of him. He had been a believer once, not in ideology, but in the idea that war was a contest between equal wills, equal armies, equal men, that victories came from daring, timing, courage. But listening to this radio was like standing on a shoreline and realizing the tide did not care about your courage. He looked at the prisoners again. Rivera stared resolutely at the floor. Carter, the radio operator, watched Vogt with a thin, apprehensive focus. A man who understood that the German officer knew now what American units had taken for granted for months. McKenna simply held Vogt's gaze. "There's always more of us coming," McKenna said quietly. "Even when you push back one line, another rolls up behind it." A German NCO snapped, "Silence!" and raised the butt of his rifle. But Vogt lifted his hand. "No," he murmured. "Let him speak." The NCO froze. McKenna blinked, surprised. Vogt stepped closer, boots thudding against the wooden bed of the truck. Snow fell from his greatcoat as he leaned down slightly. "How large is your supply column?" Vogt asked. McKenna hesitated. "Large? How many trucks?" "Hundreds." "Fuel?" "More than we can burn." "And men?" McKenna looked down. "Enough." A tremor of cold swept into the truck, rattling the metal racks. But the cold Vogt felt inside was not from the wind. He glanced out through the open flap at his own soldiers, exhausted, underfed, wrapped in mismatched scarves, boots patched with wire, rifles older than the youngest man holding them. Good soldiers, brave soldiers, men who had survived the Eastern Front, Normandy, Falaise, men who would follow him to the last round of ammunition. And for the first time, he saw the truth behind their loyalty. Their courage could not fill fuel tanks. Their bravery could not conjure trucks or food or spare parts. He turned again to the radio, just as a new transmission came through. "Air Recon confirms German armor thinning east of the salient. Recommend continued pressure. All sectors maintain coordination via primary net." Air Recon. Coordinated sectors. A machine with eyes everywhere. Vogt felt something inside him collapse, quietly, like a bridge giving way in fog. No drama, just inevitability. "It's over," he whispered. Richter lifted his head. "Sir?" "The war," Vogt said, not raising his voice. "We are fighting a war we can no longer supply. And they," he gestured to the humming radio, "they are fighting a war they cannot lose." No one spoke. Not the prisoners, not the Germans. Even the forest outside seemed to fall still, as if listening. For a moment, the only sound was the faint, steady hum of the American radio frequency. The heartbeat of an army too large, too coordinated, too well fed to ever be stopped by a single desperate gamble in the snow. The radio kept humming, an indifferent pulse in the cold. Outside, dusk seeped into the forest, turning every tree trunk into a shadow, and every shadow into a threat. Lanterns flickered along the roadside where Vogt's company had dug in, small islands of yellow light swallowed by the vast, darkening Ardennes. Vogt stepped out of the truck. The cold struck instantly, searing his cheeks and stiffening the air in his lungs. Snowflakes stung his face like sparks blown from a fire. Behind him, the canvas flap whispered shut, muffling the American transmissions, but not silencing them. He stood there for a long moment, boots sinking into the drift, staring at the dying light beyond the tree line. A Feldwebel approached, stamping warmth into his boots. "Herr Hauptmann, Battalion Headquarters is asking for your situation report. They expect confirmation that we can push toward the road junction by morning." Vogt turned slightly, the snow crunching beneath him. Morning. He pictured the map. The one he had believed only hours earlier could be seized if they struck fast enough, broke through the American spine before reinforcements arrived. But reinforcements weren't arriving. They were already here. Hundreds of trucks, thousands of men, entire columns moving toward Bastogne like gears locking into place. And overhead, soon, the skies would clear and fill with aircraft. He looked at the Feldwebel, a veteran with frost clinging to his mustache. The man's eyes were tired, the tiredness of someone who had seen every victory turn into another retreat lined by graves. "Prepare the men," Vogt said slowly, "but not for an advance." The Feldwebel blinked. "Sir?" Vogt exhaled through his nose, watching the steam drift upward like ghosts of lost choices. "We will hold this position until nightfall," he said quietly. "Then we pull back to the secondary ridge." "But headquarters?" "Headquarters does not hear what I have heard," Vogt cut in sharply. "They speak of breakthroughs, of roads to Antwerp, of collapsing American lines." He shook his head just once. "It is fantasy." The Feldwebel stared at him, the silence between them heavy with unspoken fear. Finally, he nodded. Not in agreement, but in the resigned acknowledgement soldiers give when they trust their officer more than their superiors. "Jawohl, Herr Hauptmann." He moved off to relay the order. Vogt returned to the truck. The interior glowed with the dim yellow hue of a lantern hooked to the roof. Snow melted in droplets along the metal frames. Richter was still at the set, scribbling coordinates, his gloves blackened with graphite and grease. "They're shifting artillery again," Richter reported, tapping the latest entry. 2 battalions redeployed. And, listen to this, another engineer group is repairing a road we thought we had cut. Vogt climbed inside, lowering himself onto an ammunition crate. His greatcoat bristled with frost as he leaned in to hear. The radio crackled. "Axis pressure expected to collapse along the northern flank. Maintain tempo. Logistics confirm resupply intervals stable." Stable. Such a simple word. But Vogt felt it like a blow. Germany's supply intervals were never stable. Not anymore. Not since '43. Every delivery was a gamble. Every plan survived only until the next shortage. Richter swallowed hard. "Sir, if they push like this, we could be encircled." "Yes," Vogt said. "Do we continue the offensive?" "No." The answer came quickly, Too quickly, perhaps. But something had shifted. Duty was no longer a straight line, it was a labyrinth of diminishing choices. He looked at his men through the open flap, shivering, rubbing their hands, tightening their belts because there was no more food to tighten around. These men had given everything. The high command asked for more. But the Americans? They had more to give, far more. He turned to the prisoners. McKenna watched him with an expression half grim, half curious, as if he were waiting to see what a German officer with clear evidence of defeat would do next. "You will not be harmed," Vogt said quietly. Rivera breathed out, relief trembling through him. Carter shut his eyes briefly, as though releasing a weight he had held since morning. McKenna studied Vogt, then said, "You're not the first German officer to hear our radio, you know. But maybe you're the first to actually listen." Outside, distant thunder rolled. Not from the sky, but from artillery miles away. A deep, steady rhythm. American guns, coordinated, timed, fed with endless ammunition. Vogt looked down at the floorboards, listening to that far-off rhythm blend with the radio's electric hum. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "I was a school teacher before the war," he said. "History. I taught my students that wars are decided by courage, by leadership, by bold strategy." He paused, fingers curling around the edge of a crate. "But that is not the truth." McKenna tilted his head. "What is?" Vogt lifted his eyes, colder now, but steadier. "Wars are decided," he said, "by who can keep fighting when the other cannot." A burst of American chatter crackled through the speaker, full of calm efficiency. Vogt didn't even flinch at it now. He stood, pulling the canvas flap aside. "Richter," he said, "shut it down." The younger man hesitated. "Sir, there is still more intelligence we could gather." "No," Vogt replied. "We have heard enough." Richter clicked the switch. The American voices vanished mid-sentence. In the sudden silence, the forest outside sounded impossibly vast. Vogt stepped down into the snow. Tomorrow he would have to justify his withdrawal. He might be court-martialed. He might be relieved of command. He might even be shot. But tonight he would save what men he could, because the war was already lost. And he had realized it inside an American radio truck, listening to a machine too powerful for courage alone to stop. Night settled over the Ardennes like a lid shutting over a dying flame. The snowfall thickened, drifting down in heavy, muffled curtains that erased footsteps within minutes and turned every foxhole into a shallow white grave. The cold hardened, the air snapped like dry wire. By 2100 hours, Vogt's company had quietly begun preparing for the withdrawal. No trumpets, no shouted orders, only the whisper of boots in snow, and the metallic tick of rifles being checked one last time. A young Oberleutnant approached Vogt, his breath trembling clouds in the darkness. "Sir, the men are ready, but they're asking why we're pulling back. We've never abandoned a position this quickly." Vogt looked at him. The boy could not have been older than 19. Frost clung to his eyelashes. His hands shook not from fear, but from exhaustion. He had fought in Normandy, survived the retreat, the pockets, the hunger. Like so many others, he had no victories left in him, only the instinct to endure. "Tell them," Vogt said quietly, "that we move to survive, not to retreat." The soldier nodded slowly. He didn't fully understand, but he didn't question it either. Not tonight. Behind them, the captured American radio truck sat like a great, mute corpse in the snow. Its canvas flapped weakly with each gust of wind. the dark silhouette of the antenna rising like a broken spine against the night sky. Inside, the silent equipment still held the warmth of recently living voices. American voices. Voices full of momentum, strength, certainty. Voices of an army that was not dying. Vogt forced himself to turn away. He crossed the narrow camp, passing the faces of his men illuminated by dim lantern glow. Cheeks hollowed by hunger, fingers red and cracked, helmets dusted with snow like powdered ash. Men he had led since 1942. Men he had buried. Men he would not throw into the jaws of the machine he had heard through the radio. At the tree line, Richter approached, tightening the strap of his MP-40. "Sir," Richter said softly, "what will Battalion Command say when our absence is noticed?" Vogt looked toward the distant ridge. Across the valley, a faint orange glow throbbed in the sky. American artillery firing in steady intervals, lighting the clouds like a heartbeat. "They will say we disobeyed orders," Vogt answered. "They will say we lacked resolve. They will say many things." Richter swallowed. "And are they wrong?" Vogt exhaled through his nose, watching the steam rise. "They are fighting the war they want to believe in," he said. "We are fighting the war that actually exists." A distant engine rumbled. American armor repositioning for the counterstrike that would come at dawn. Even at this range, the sound had weight, certainty, momentum. "Come," Vogt said. "We move quietly. No lights, no shouting. Stay close to the tree line." His men assembled in a dark column, silhouettes blending with the forest at their backs. Rifles slung, winter coats drawn tight, they waited for their captain's word. Before he gave it, Vogt turned to the 3 prisoners sitting beneath a fir tree, guarded by 2 German riflemen. Snow coated the prisoners' shoulders. Their breath was shallow with cold. "You will remain here," Vogt told them. "My men will leave you blankets. Another patrol will find you by morning." McKenna looked up, bewildered. "You're letting us be rescued?" "Yes." "Why?" Vogt hesitated, the snow drifting silently between them. "Because the war is no longer between you and me," Vogt said. "It is between those who accept reality and those who insist on denying it." McKenna opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded once. An acknowledgement between soldiers, not enemies. Vogt stepped back to his men. The forest loomed behind him like a black ocean. He raised a gloved hand. "Move!" Boots stirred the snow. The column slipped into the trees, ghosts dissolving into the night. They moved without speaking, their breath the only sound, mingling with the whisper of branches heavy with frost. As they descended the ridge, Vogt looked back one final time. The radio truck was barely visible now, a dark hulk against a sea of white. A relic, an omen, a mirror he had been forced to look into. Beyond it, far across the valley, the glow of American firepower continued pulsing against the sky, steady, controlled, inevitable. The war had not been lost on a battlefield. It had been lost in that truck, in the quiet hum of an American radio telling its calm, unstoppable truth. And Heinrich Vogt, school teacher turned captain, finally understood that truth in full. Germany had run out of future. But he would not let his men run out of life. The descent through the forest was slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. Branches sagged under the weight of fresh snow, brushing the men's helmets as they passed. Their breaths came in tight plumes, vanishing into the cold air the moment they appeared. The path was barely visible, only a faint depression beneath the snow where deer trails had once run. Vogt led the column, boots crunching softly in the hush of winter. He carried his map case slung under his coat, the captured American coordinates tucked inside like forbidden scripture. His MP-40 hung at his side, frosted metal dull in the faint moonlight. Every few minutes, he paused, listening. Not for American patrols, those would come at dawn, but for something far more dangerous. The sound of German engines. If Battalion HQ had dispatched another company forward, or if Hulsen's battle group had turned its flank, they would collide in this valley before morning. And then questions would be asked, orders demanded, obedience enforced. But the forest stayed silent, save for the occasional snap of ice breaking beneath the crust of snow. Behind Vogt, Richter whispered as he trudged downhill, "If they court-martial us, do you think they'll do it quickly?" Vogt didn't stop walking. "If they catch us," he said, "we'll worry about the court-martial then. And if they don't catch us, then we keep our lives. And that is victory enough." The young corporal nodded, though his expression remained clouded. Another soldier, Feldwebel Schreiber, stepped closer to Vogt, voice low. "Herr Hauptmann, may I ask something?" "Yes." "Do you think command knows? About the Americans, I mean. About their scale." The word scale hung in the air like another snowfall, soft, heavy, impossible to ignore. Vogt thought for a long moment before answering. "Some know. The ones at the top. The ones who see the whole chessboard." "And they still sent us forward?" Schreiber asked, bitterness chafing his voice. "Because they believe they can will the board to change," Vogt murmured. "But they cannot." The path steepened. The men descended in single file, rifles slung, uniforms blending into the darkness. The forest muffled all sound. An insulating blanket that felt both protective and suffocating. Then faintly, from far behind them, boom. A distant ripple of artillery. Then another. The Americans had begun their night barrages. Testing, ranging, softening. The ground trembled beneath their boots. "Keep moving," Vogt whispered. They did. Minutes stretched into an hour. The forest thinned. The valley opened into a shallow clearing where a frozen stream cut a jagged line through the snow. Vogt halted his men with a raised fist. The stream was narrow, but the ice looked fragile. Dark water pooling beneath thin sheets. The company gathered behind him, their flickering lanterns extinguished to keep visibility low. "We cross here," Vogt said. "But sir," a soldier murmured, "North Ridge is still exposed. If we move along the stream, we might be seen." Vogt crouched, his hand brushing the surface of the ice. It crackled faintly, thin but crossable. "We cross now," he said firmly. "Better to move where no one expects us than where everyone will look." One by one, the men stepped onto the ice. It groaned beneath their weight, but held. Halfway across, Richter whispered, "If HQ learns we left our position, they'll brand us cowards." Vogt stepped carefully, boots slipping slightly before finding purchase again. The cold of the ice bled through his soles like creeping numbness. "We are not cowards," Vogt said quietly. "We are realists." The last of the men crossed the stream, boots striking firm snow on the far side. Vogt followed, the ice groaning loudly under him, cracking in thin white lines that chased his heels. When he reached solid ground, he turned back. The path behind them was already vanishing under falling snow, their footprints blurred, their passage erased, the forest reclaiming what little trace they left. Good. He faced his men. "From here," Vogt said, "we move east, quietly, Stay in staggered groups. No fires, no talking above a whisper. And when dawn comes? Richter asked. Vogt looked toward the faint, warm glow staining the night sky behind the forest. American artillery flashes, moving steadily, methodically. When dawn comes, he said, the Americans will advance. They will retake the ridge. They will find the prisoners. And us? Vogt pulled his collar tighter against the cold. We will be gone. The company began moving again, slipping into the darkness. Snow fell thicker, swallowing their shapes. The forest closed in behind them, like a curtain. But Vogt paused once more, turning back to the ridge, now just a shadow behind the veil of snowfall. Up there stood the stolen American radio truck. Up there, the truth had been spoken aloud, without hesitation or fear. Up there, the war had ended for him. He closed his eyes, inhaling the cold deeply. Then he followed his men into the night. The snow thickened into a white curtain that devoured sound and distance. As Vogt's column moved deeper into the forest, the lights of the ridge vanished entirely, swallowed by trees and the gentle, relentless fall of winter. Only the muffled crunch of boots and the creak of gear broke the silence. Hours passed. The men moved in staggered groups, as ordered. Shadows threading between pine trunks, breath steaming through scarves, helmets brushing the low branches. The silence between them was not fear. It was resignation, understanding, relief that someone had finally said aloud what they all felt in their bones. They stopped only when the terrain dipped into a sheltered hollow, a natural bowl of frost-covered earth ringed by firs. Vogt lifted his hand, signaling a halt. Here, he whispered. We wait. The men dropped into the snow, exhausted. Some crouched, others sat fully, leaning against trees, their rifles across their laps. No fires, no light, just the cold, creeping into their boots and fingers and lungs. Richter approached, settling beside Vogt on a fallen log. Sir, he murmured, we won't last long out here, without warmth. We're not staying long, Vogt replied. Richter nodded, though anxiety flickered in his eyes. He was young. Too young for this kind of clarity. Too young to understand the full weight of what they had escaped, and what now hunted them from both sides. From the ridge came the faint rumble of distant engines. Vogt stiffened. American armor. The timing was exact, precisely as the radio had foretold. The sound grew louder, reverberating across the valley like distant thunder rolling over frozen earth. Vogt could pick out individual rhythms, the growl of Shermans, the clatter of half-tracks, the slow, heavy grind of tank destroyers pushing up the slope. Richter exhaled, a trembling breath. They're already there. Yes, Vogt said softly. They are. Another rumble joined the first, deeper, slower, artillery being brought forward. The Americans were not simply advancing. They were unfolding an entire offensive structure in real time, like an iron skeleton filling itself with muscle and movement. Exactly as the radio had described. Exactly as Vogt now knew they would. His men heard it too. Some straightened, others looked away. No one spoke. This is why we left, Vogt whispered. He imagined what would be happening at their abandoned position, American tanks sweeping through the snow, infantry moving in line, medics trailing behind with litters ready. They would find the prisoners first, alive. Then the truck. Then nothing but empty foxholes and disappearing footprints. By then, Vogt's men would already be miles away. A dull, rolling boom echoed across the forest. American artillery firing a test volley over the ridge. Sometime later, a second sound cut through the night. Engines. German engines. Vogt stiffened. The noise approached from the east, their own side. Kubelwagens. Possibly a half-track. Maybe a motorcycle dispatch rider. Headquarters had noticed the silence from Vogt's company. "They're coming for us," Richter whispered. Vogt nodded slowly. It was only a matter of time. He stood, brushing snow from his coat. His silhouette rose against the faint lunar glow through the trees. "Listen to me," he said, raising his voice just enough for the nearest squads to hear. "If they find us, do not speak of the radio. Do not mention what we heard." The men looked up, eyes hollow, tired, knowing. "If they ask why we withdrew," Vogt continued, "you say the route was impassable. You say the Americans counterattacked. You say anything, except the truth." Schreiber stepped forward, jaw clenched. "And you, sir? What will you say?" Vogt gazed eastward, where the faint rumble of German engines grew louder in the trees. "I will say," Vogt murmured, "whatever keeps you alive." The men exchanged glances. Fear, loyalty, confusion, gratitude all tangled together. The first German vehicle appeared moments later. Headlights dimmed under blackout covers, engine coughing in the cold. A motorcycle with a sidecar followed, then a half-track grinding through the snow. Voices called out in the dark. "Hauptmann Vogt, report!" Vogt stepped forward, raising a hand. "Here." A shadowy figure dismounted. Major Albrecht, battalion operations officer, a stern man with a thin, severe mustache and eyes that missed nothing. Snow clung to his shoulders like epaulettes of frost. He strode toward Vogt. "You left your post," Albrecht snapped. "Explain yourself." Vogt inhaled once, cold, sharp, and braced himself. But before he could answer, a distant roar echoed across the valley. American armor firing again, closer this time, the ground trembling. Albrecht glanced over his shoulder, expression tightening. Then Vogt said, with calm conviction, "Sir, the Americans are massing for a counterstrike. If we had remained, we would have been overrun before dawn." Albrecht studied him, snow swirling between them. The American engines roared again. Albrecht's jaw tensed. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. Your decision may have saved your men. Get them ready. We're falling back to secondary lines." He turned toward his vehicles, shouting orders. Vogt exhaled, breath shaking. Richter appeared beside him, whispering, "He believed you." Vogt watched the dark shapes of German vehicles turning in the snow, heard the American armor closing in behind the ridge, felt the forest trembling with the weight of two armies converging. "Yes," Vogt said quietly, "but only because the truth is now undeniable." He looked down at his men, cold, exhausted, alive. The forest winds hissed softly through the fir needles. For a moment longer, Vogt allowed himself to feel the weight of what had happened, the quiet, devastating revelation that had reshaped the war in his mind. Then he straightened. "Men," he ordered softly, "fall in." The company rose, weary limbs stiff under layers of frost. They marched eastward, deeper, into the night, leaving behind the ridge the radio truck, and the moment the war had finally revealed its true shape, the shape of defeat and survival. The column moved in a slow, winding file through the snow-covered forest, following the German vehicles deeper into the collapsing front. Every few minutes, the trees shook with the distant concussion of artillery. The sky flashed faintly, not bright enough to illuminate the world, just enough to remind them that the war still hunted them from behind. But the closer Vogt marched toward his own lines, the stranger the air felt. It wasn't relief. It was dread. Not from the Americans, but from returning to the very command whose plans the captured radio had just proven utterly blind. By dawn, the forest thinned. Beyond the last line of trees, Vogt's company emerged into a battered reserve position, a messy sprawl of tents, command trucks half buried in snow, and shivering infantry huddled around stoves. The air smelled of diesel, cordite, and desperation. Major Albrecht guided his half-track to a halt and dismounted. "Vogt, with me," he ordered. Vogt told his men to rest while they still could, then followed the major through a maze of slush-filled pathways. Inside a makeshift operations tent, kerosene lanterns hissed. A large map lay stretched across a table, weighed down with spent shell casings. 3 officers stood around it, tense, unshaven, arguing in clipped voices about divisions that no longer existed and units that had been annihilated before orders even reached them. The senior officer, Oberst von Harten, turned as Vogt entered. His uniform was immaculate, but his eyes were hollow, ringed with exhaustion. "Major Albrecht," he said. "You brought him?" "Yes, Herr Oberst." Von Harten's gaze fixed on Vogt, sharp as a knife. "You abandoned your forward position during an ongoing offensive." Vogt stood rigid. "Sir, the situation became Everything is untenable," von Harten snapped. "That is not an explanation." The tent fell silent. Even the lanterns seemed to dim. Vogt inhaled once. He had rehearsed the lie in his mind a dozen times. A simple story, believable, non-treasonous, but words caught in his throat. Because behind von Harten, pinned to the map, Vogt saw the same arrow he'd seen on the American radio display. An arrow showing a massive U.S. counterattack coming from the northwest. The exact same direction, the same units, the same timetable. Von Harten tapped the map irritably. "Command believes these reports are exaggerated," he said. "We have no confirmation the Americans are capable of such an advance." Vogt stared at him. No confirmation. The Americans had been broadcasting their movements openly across captured channels. Not out of arrogance, but because German listening stations were already in ruins. Because they could. Because they knew the German high command was blind. Vogt exhaled slowly. "Sir," he said, choosing each word like stepping onto thin ice, "I believe the Americans have more strength in that sector than expected." Von Harten scoffed. "Based on what? Rumors? Panicked foot soldiers fleeing their posts?" Vogt did not blink. "No, sir. Based on engines, I heard. Armor, artillery, moving in numbers far beyond anything we've seen in this area." Von Harten froze. He wasn't a fool. He sensed something beneath the surface. Something Vogt wasn't saying. He stepped closer. "You heard this," he said, "but you did not see it." "No, sir." "Then it is not evidence." A beat of silence. In that moment, Vogt understood. If he told the truth, that he had captured an American radio truck and heard their entire deployment, he would be accused of mishandling Allied equipment, unauthorized intelligence possession, possibly sabotage, potentially treason. Not because the truth was damning to him, but because the truth was damning to them, to the entire chain of command. Von Harten leaned even closer, eyes narrowing. "You withdrew your company without orders," he said quietly. "That alone borders on insubordination." Vogt held his breath. For a heartbeat, he sensed the trap closing around him. Then, from outside, a thunderous whump shook the ground. Snow fell from the tent poles, the lantern swung violently. Von Harten spun around as another distant boom rolled across the valley. Major Albrecht burst through the flap. Herr Oberst, American artillery just hit positions 4 kilometers north. Range and direction match. He stopped himself, glancing at Vogt. Von Harten stared at the map, the color draining from his face. The American counteroffensive had begun. Exactly as Vogt had known it would. Exactly as the radio had foretold. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, von Harten inhaled through clenched teeth. "Hauptmann Vogt," he said stiffly, "it appears your instincts served you well." Instincts. The word felt bitter, cowardly, wrong. Vogt said nothing. Von Harten straightened. "Return to your men. Prepare to move. We fall back to Line Gustav at once." "Yes, sir," Vogt replied. He saluted, turned, and stepped back into the icy morning air. Outside, the early sun hovered weakly behind thick clouds, barely lighting the churned snow. Vogt walked with measured steps, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle on him like frost. His instinct had been right. His decision had saved his men. But the truth, the real truth, could never be spoken. Not here, not now, not to anyone. Richter jogged up to him as he neared the resting troops. "What happened?" the young man asked breathlessly. Vogt looked at his company, shivering, exhausted, alive, and felt the warm sun of a lie rising above them. "Nothing," Vogt said, quietly. "We move soon." Richter nodded, though confusion clouded his eyes. Then Vogt added, softer, "And from this point forward, what we heard that night stays buried in the snow." Richter swallowed. "Yes, sir." The men stood, tightening straps, checking weapons, falling into formation. They would march again, deeper into the retreat, deeper into a war already lost, deeper into the long, cold shadow of a truth that could never be spoken aloud. Vogt took his place at their head, and as they moved he felt, for the first time, not like a commander leading soldiers, but like a man carrying a secret that weighed more than his rifle. A secret that would outlive the battle and haunt him for the rest of the war. The withdrawal began at noon. Snow churned under boots and tracks as Vogel Company merged into the slow-moving line of retreating German units. Vehicles sputtered past, overloaded with wounded men wrapped in blankets, their faces gray with cold and shock. Horse-drawn wagons creaked under crates of ammunition that no one believed would ever be fired. The whole column moved like a wounded animal, limping, bleeding, too exhausted to howl. Vogt walked at the front of his company, rifle slung, breath steady. His eyes scanned the tree line, then the sky, then the road ahead. The Americans wouldn't strike immediately. Their timetable said mid-afternoon. But the Germans were now well within the net of their advancing machine. He could feel it. In the air, in the earth, in the way the distant thunder of artillery followed them like a slow, stalking predator. Richter trudged just behind him, pack bouncing with every step. "Sir," he murmured, "do you think we'll make it to Line Gustav?" Vogt didn't answer at first. Ahead, the road twisted between two low hills, both capped with thin lines of trees swaying under the wind. Fresh snow slid off branches in soft cascades. He studied the curves, the shadows, the shapes that could hide enemy scouts. Then he finally replied. "Yes," Vogt said, "but the war will not be waiting for us when we get there. Only more orders." Richter frowned. "Orders for what?" "For holding," Vogt said. "Always holding, until there is nothing left to hold." The young corporal looked away, jaw tightening. The truth was too raw. too sharp, and Vogt regretted letting it slip. By mid-afternoon, the retreating column reached a small crossroads. Nothing more than a ruined farmhouse, a collapsed barn, and a cluster of broken fences. Smoke curled from the wreckage, stinging the air with the acrid scent of burned wood and scorched rubber. Feldwebel Schreiber jogged up to Vogt. "Herr Hauptmann," he said, pointing to the horizon. "Look!" Across the valley floor, 5 thin lines of smoke rose from a distant ridge, perfectly spaced, perfectly aligned. American artillery range markers. They were zeroing in. The timetable was still exact. Vogt's pulse quickened. The faint vibrations in the ground told him what would come next. He grabbed Schreiber's shoulder. "Double the pace. Tell the men to stay spread out. No bunching." As Schreiber ran to relay the order, Vogt scanned the valley again. Another plume of smoke joined the others. The Americans had bracketed the entire road. Richter stepped closer. "Sir?" Vogt grabbed his arm. "When it comes, hit the ditch on the right side, not the left." "Why the right?" "Left faces the valley. Right is shielded by the embankment. You go right. Understood?" Richter nodded, eyes wide. But before he could speak again, a bright white flash tore across the sky. Then the world erupted. Boom! The shockwave hit like a giant's hammer. Snow leapt from the ground in a massive spray. Men dove, shouted, scrambled. The earth shook beneath them. Another flash. Boom! The second shell landed closer, too close, lifting a transport truck into the air and dropping it on its side. Its wheels spun uselessly, the driver crawling out with blood trickling from his ear. Vogt hit the ditch, rolling to shield his face. Dirt showered over him, mixed with snow and shrapnel. The air vibrated in his chest. A third shell screamed downward. Boom! The blast wave rippled down the road like a whip. Splinters from the farmhouse roof rained across the entire column. "Stay low!" Vogt shouted, throat raw. "Stay, spread out!" But the artillery was not random. It was calculated, precise. It walked down the road with mechanical inevitability, each blast landing exactly 200 meters farther along. Just as the American radio truck had said it would. Just as Vogt had feared. He belly-crawled up the ditch, dragging Richter beside him. "We need to move the men off this road," Vogt yelled. Richter nodded, coughing through dust. Vogt turned toward his scattered company. "Into the trees!" he roared. "Everyone move!" One after another, his soldiers sprinted from the roadside ditch into the shelter of the forest. Some stumbled. Some limped with shrapnel wounds. But they went, their instincts screaming louder than the artillery. Another barrage landed, this one even closer. Smoke rolled through the valley in thick gray waves. Through the chaos, Vogt saw a young private, barely 18, frozen in the middle of the road, eyes locked on the burning wreck of the truck ahead. He wasn't moving. Vogt broke from cover, sprinting through the haze. "Move!" he shouted. The boy didn't react. A new artillery whistle cut the air, a high, thin shriek falling straight toward them. Vogt slammed into the boy, tackling him into the ditch just as the shell detonated behind them. Boom! The blast lifted snow and soil in a violent column. A telephone pole cracked and toppled, hitting the road with a heavy thud. Vogt's ears rang. The boy trembled beneath him. "Get up," Vogt said, breath shaking. "Get up and run." Together, they scrambled toward the trees, stumbling over frozen roots. Once inside the forest's cover, Vogt collapsed to one knee, panting hard. The artillery shifted again, farther down the road now, chasing units that had not moved fast enough. Richter ran up to him. "Sir, the men are clear." Vogt looked around at the scattered shapes of his company, alive, shaken, bloodied, but alive. The artillery thunder rolled away into the distance. He exhaled, slowly, painfully, because the truth had just carved itself into reality with the force of 100 American shells. The radio had been right, every word of it. And now everyone in Vogt's company had witnessed the precision of an army with limitless supply, limitless coordination, limitless reach. Richter spoke quietly. Herr Hauptmann, this war is over, isn't it? Vogt didn't answer. He couldn't. Not while the truth still echoed through the valley like fading thunder. He simply stood, brushed the snow from his coat, and said, "Form up. We keep moving." The men obeyed, not because of orders, but because they understood. For the first time, they understood everything. They followed Vogt deeper into the forest, following a commander who knew the war was lost, but would march them out alive. The forest swallowed them whole. Tall pines pressed close on either side, their branches heavy with snow that fell in slow drifts with every movement of the wind. The deeper Vogt led his men, the more the thunder of artillery faded into a distant heartbeat, steady, relentless, but no longer able to touch them. They walked in two lines, dispersed, quiet. Helmets dusted white, faces gray, rifles slung low in gloved hands, stiff from cold and shock. For the first hour, no one spoke, not even Richter. Men just marched, breathing the cold in ragged patterns. In, out, in, out. Some still shook from the concussion blasts. Others staggered with each step, dazed, blood drying on their ears or dripping from small wounds cut by shrapnel. Their breath fogged in the air behind them, drifting away like small ghosts. Vogt kept pace at the front. He didn't limp, though his right leg trembled from the force of the explosions. He didn't show the pain in his side where he'd taken the impact from diving with a young private. He didn't wipe away the dust on his face. He walked as if he had been carved from the same cold wood that surrounded them. Because his men needed that. Because if he faltered, they would break. After 2 hours, Schreiber jogged up alongside him. "Herr Hauptmann," he whispered, "the men are asking how far we still have to go." Vogt didn't answer immediately. He scanned the snow-covered banks, the bends in the terrain, the faint trail that wound through the forest. "Far enough that the Americans stopped looking," he finally said. Schreiber nodded with grim understanding. "And then?" he asked. "Then we rejoin the nearest defensive line, Gustav, if it still exists." Vogt paused, then added, "Assuming command hasn't already moved it another 10 kilometers in the last hour." Schreiber exhaled a small, bitter laugh. "Do you think they know?" he asked. "About the Americans' precision? Their coordination?" Vogt kept his eyes ahead. "They will know soon," he said, "when their own positions vanish from under them." The Feldwebel slowed his pace, falling back into the formation. The forest thinned again near afternoon. White light filtered through the trees, illuminating a frozen logging path. Vogt raised his hand to halt the column. He knelt, brushing the snow aside. Tracks, fresh, large, boot prints mixed with tire marks. But the boots weren't American. German hobnails left distinct star-shaped impressions. Richter crouched beside him. "Friendly?" "Possibly," Vogt said. "But if it's an MP patrol..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Military police had been ordered to crack down on deserters, stragglers, defeatist elements. Anyone out of position could be arrested or shot. Richter's throat tightened. "What do we do?" Vogt stood. "We follow the path, but slowly. Eyes open. Weapons down unless I say otherwise." They moved forward. Half a kilometer later, a bend in the path revealed the source of the tracks. A small German encampment nestled between two ridges. 3 half-tracks, a field kitchen, a few tents. Smoke rising from a stove chimney. A sign nailed to a tree read, Kampfkommandantur, Feldpost 287. A provisional command post. A temporary one. A nervous one. Vogt exhaled. "We approach slowly," he said. "No sudden movements. No speaking unless spoken to." His men nodded. They marched toward the camp. A sentry spotted them first. A soldier with a steel-gray overcoat and a rifle slung across his back. His eyes widened as he sprinted toward the nearest tent. Within seconds, 2 more soldiers emerged, then 4, then 7. Rifles raised hesitantly, unsure whether they were seeing German survivors or American infiltrators wearing German coats. Vogt stepped ahead of his men, raising his hand. "Hauptmann Martin Vogt," he announced calmly. "Vogt Company, falling back from the front under orders of Oberst von Harten, seeking to report and regroup." The tense line softened, weapons lowered. A lieutenant approached, face unshaven, eyes red from lack of sleep. "You were with von Harten?" he asked, incredulous. "We heard he'd been overrun." "Not yet," Vogt said. "But the fighting behind us is severe." The lieutenant gestured toward the camp. "Get your men inside the perimeter. There's space near the kitchen tent." Vogt nodded, signaling his men forward. But as they entered the camp, he noticed something. The troops here, maybe 30 in total, watched Vogt's company with a peculiar expression. Relief. And something else. Recognition. As if they had already heard a rumor. Richter leaned close and whispered, "Sir, they know something." Vogt nodded. He could feel it too. The air carried a quiet hum of conversation. Whispers about a German unit retreating through the forests, surviving an hours-long American barrage, navigating a collapse that no one at higher command had warned them about. Stories travel fast on a collapsing front. But truths travel faster. Vogt pulled off his gloves and stepped toward the lieutenant. "What is your situation here?" he asked. The lieutenant looked around before answering. "Orders are unclear," he said. "Some say hold the ridge. Some say fall back to the next river line. But no one can reach Corps headquarters. Radios are dead. Wire lines are cut." His eyes shifted toward the distant horizon, where the muffled rumble of American artillery echoed like approaching thunder. "We don't know where the front is anymore." Silence settled between them. Richter, listening, swallowed hard. Vogt breathed in the icy air. This was it. The moment when the truth he held, the truth from the captured American radio truck, aligned perfectly with the truth now unfolding across the collapsing German lines. The war wasn't simply going badly. It wasn't in doubt. It wasn't uncertain. It was over. Just not officially. Not yet. "Lieutenant," Vogt finally said, "my men need food and rest. After that, we'll speak about your orders." The lieutenant nodded gratefully. As Vogt turned back to his company, Richter walked beside him. "What now, sir?" the young corporal asked softly. Vogt's breath drifted into the air like a ghost. "Now," he said, "we keep them alive." And for the first time, he allowed himself to say, not out loud, but silently, to the cold gray sky, "No more illusions. No more lies. This is survival." The stove inside the camp crackled weakly, its thin pipe wheezing little curls of smoke that dissolved into the frozen air. Vogt's men gathered around it in a loose ring, not crowding, not speaking, just absorbing whatever warmth the small flame could offer. Some shuffled off their packs. Others unwrapped rations with stiff, numb fingers. A few simply sat in the snow, heads bowed, as if they finally had a moment to collapse. For the first time in days, there was no artillery chasing them. No orders barking for forward assault. Just silence and exhaustion. Vogt stood apart, brushing frost from his collar, watching the camp with an assessing eye. The men stationed here weren't front-line infantry. Their uniforms were cleaner, their boots less worn, their beards shorter. They still held rifles with a kind of naive tension, not yet understanding that weapons meant little in a war already swallowed whole by logistics and crushing numerical force. Richter approached with a tin cup of bitter black coffee. "Here, sir." Vogt accepted it, warming his hands around the metal. "Thank you." Richter hesitated before asking, "How long do we stay?" "Long enough to know their orders," Vogt said, sipping. "Not a minute more." He said it low, but Richter still stiffened at the implication. Vogt Company would not get trapped here, not under officers still clinging to illusions of counterattacks or last stands, not after seeing what the Americans truly had in motion. Across the camp, a small commotion brewed near the lieutenant's tent. A cluster of soldiers leaned in as the lieutenant argued with a radio operator, the radio itself crackling uselessly with static. Vogt approached, slipping through the ring. The lieutenant noticed him and motioned irritably. "Hauptmann, perhaps you can help talk sense into my men." Vogt raised an eyebrow. "What's the matter?" The lieutenant gestured at the radio operator. "He claims he picked up American transmissions, coordinates, timetables, a massive advance across the entire sector." The operator nodded earnestly. "It's real, sir. The signals are strong, stronger than anything we've picked up since Antwerp." The lieutenant scoffed. "Nonsense. Americans don't broadcast operations openly. It's a trick, interference, weather distortion." Vogt felt his pulse steady, cold, dangerously calm. He stepped closer to the radio operator. "What frequencies?" Vogt asked. "High band, sir. Clear, organized, multiple divisions." "And the direction of origin?" "Northwest." The same as the captured truck. The lieutenant sighed loudly. "Hauptmann, please, tell him this is impossible. We would have been warned." Vogt looked at the map pinned on the tent wall. Then he lied. Or rather, he lied in a way that protected the truth. "Lieutenant," Vogt said quietly, "my men passed through heavy bombardment, much heavier than expected for this sector. The Americans appear more active than command assumes." The lieutenant frowned. "That doesn't mean they're advancing." "No," Vogt said, keeping his voice neutral. "But it means preparations may be larger than our intelligence suggests." That was the safest version of the truth. A truth wrapped in cotton. A truth that wouldn't get him shot for knowing too much. The lieutenant turned back to his men, clearly irritated. "Return to duty," he snapped. "We wait for proper orders. No one makes a move until then." The circle dispersed. But the operator lingered, glancing at Vogt. He lowered his voice. "Hauptmann," he whispered. "You don't believe him, do you?" Vogt paused. He chose each word with surgical care. "I believe," he said, "that you hear what you say you hear." The operator's eyes widened, fear and relief mixing in equal measure. "And I believe," Vogt continued quietly, "you should keep that to yourself for now." The young operator nodded, understanding the weight behind the warning. He slipped away. Vogt stepped outside the tent and inhaled the cold air. The sky had turned a pale, washed-out blue, the kind that came before heavy snowfall. The wind had softened, but the camp still felt tense, like a frozen animal aware of the predator in the forest, but unable to see it yet. Schreiber approached, his face tight. "Sir, some of the men overheard about the radio." Vogt nodded slowly. "What are they saying?" Schreiber hesitated. "That you already knew." Vogt looked past him to where his soldiers huddled near the stove. Their eyes were different now, not fearful, not panicked, but aware. They had followed him out of the barrage, out of the collapse, out of the ridge the Americans had taken without contest. They trusted him. But trust could shift into suspicion in times like these. "Tell them," Vogt said calmly, "that we move with caution because the situation changes by the hour. Nothing more. And if they press further?" Vogt looked him dead in the eyes. "Then tell them the truth they can bear. Not the truth that will break them." Schreiber nodded, then walked off to steady the whispers. The lieutenant approached again as Vogt studied the tree line. "Hauptmann," he said, rubbing his arms against the cold. "I've decided to send a small patrol to scout the northern ridge. If the Americans are moving, we need to know their direction." Vogt's jaw tightened. A patrol would vanish, consumed by the American advance, either captured or destroyed by artillery scouts already sweeping the ridges. "May I suggest," Vogt said diplomatically, "that you conserve your manpower? The situation is fluid. Sending small groups may only leave you blind when you most need eyes." The lieutenant frowned. "Are you giving me orders?" "No," Vogt said. "Just a warning from someone who barely escaped the last ridge." The lieutenant hesitated, pride warring with instinct. Finally, he sighed. "Very well. Patrol delayed." Vogt bowed his head slightly. A wise choice. Minutes later, when the lieutenant walked away, Richter appeared at Vogt's side. "That was close," Richter whispered. "You saved them, even if he doesn't realize it." Vogt didn't answer. He scanned the forest again, listened to the wind. The truth, now heavy inside him, beat with every pulse. He wasn't saving this lieutenant. He wasn't saving the camp. He was saving time. Time to think. Time to decide. Time to pick a moment when marching back into command's illusions would stop being survival and start being a death sentence. Richter whispered, "Sir, what do we do next?" Vogt exhaled slowly. The camp crackled with fragile normalcy. Men eating, a cook stirring a pot, weapons being wiped down. And yet, beyond, the trees. The war was coming like a storm with perfect coordinates. "We wait," Vogt said quietly. "And then," he added, voice dropping to a whisper, "we move again." Richter nodded, because he already knew. Vogt wasn't just marching his men east. He was marching them out of the collapse, out of the lie, out of a war already lost. January 1st, 1945, outskirts of Trois Ponts, Belgium. Snow sweeps sideways across the ruined valley as Oberleutnant Markus Feldmann trudges through the dark tree line, the captured American radio truck now half buried in drifting powder behind him. Its engine is dead, its lights smashed. But its cargo, those maps, those timetables, those incomprehensibly vast Allied coordination logs, burn in his mind like a fever he cannot shake. He moves alone now. His men have scattered, sent back in pairs toward German lines. But he lingers, pacing through the bleak silence of the Ardennes forest like a man trapped between two collapsing worlds. Ahead, Muzzle flashes strobe from a distant ridge. American artillery firing in perfect rhythm, shells dropping with mechanical precision far beyond the front line. Their range is staggering. Even in the night, he can see their arcs through the snow, overlapping patterns like a choreographed display. It's exactly what he saw written in the American dispatch logs. Coordinated fire networks. Multiple divisions cross-linked by radio. Thousands of vehicles timed to arrive at single junctions within minutes of each other. Reserve fuel columns stretching back to France. Fresh infantry divisions rotating every 48 hours. It wasn't just strength. It was system. An industrial organism. Feldmann crouches near the frozen stump of a blown pine tree, breath shallow, feeling the weight of his discovery press down harder than the winter air. He remembers the moment inside that captured truck. The radio chatter, the coded grid references, the volume of traffic. The realization had hit him like a blow to the chest. Germany could still fight, but it could no longer compete. The Ardennes offensive, the last gamble, suddenly felt like a child pushing against a tidal wave. A distant rumble trembles through the ground. Feldmann turns to see a long American supply column rolling along a forest road, half a kilometer away. It's past midnight, yet the trucks move with exact spacing, guided by radio signals invisible to the winter night. They escort tanks on flatbeds, crates of mortar rounds, fuel, medical equipment, spare parts. Everything the German army is now starving for. And it just keeps coming. Truck after truck, line after endless line. His throat tightens. Back home, his brother's Panzer regiment has been cannibalizing broken tanks for parts. Here, he watches Allied mechanics riding atop their transports with tool cases already open, prepared to fix vehicles on the move. He whispers to himself, voice cracking in the cold. Sie haben die Zukunft, nicht wir. They have the future, not us. A burst of machine gun fire rips somewhere deeper in the trees. He flinches but doesn't move. His body feels anchored to the frost, as if the very forest is holding him in place. He imagines reporting his findings to division headquarters. Will they listen? Or will they call it defeatism? High command still speaks of turning points, miracles, breakthroughs. But Feldmann has seen the truth. In that truck, he'd glimpsed the machinery of an empire built on mass production, logistics, and coordination Germany could no longer hope to match. A branch snaps behind him. He whirls, hand on his pistol, only to find one of his own men, Unteroffizier Kramer, stumbling through the trees, face pale. Herr Oberleutnant, patrol's closing in. We need to move. Feldmann nods distantly, but as they fall back toward the thinning German lines, he turns one last time to look across the valley. The American supply column winds like a steel serpent through the snow. Unstoppable, unending, unhurried. And in that stark, frozen moment, Markus Feldmann understands something he will never forget. The war is not lost because Germany lacks courage. It is lost because courage means nothing against a nation that can replace every bullet fired, every vehicle destroyed, every tank burned by the thousands before sunrise. He lowers his head and follows Kramer into the dark woods, each step feeling like a surrender he can never speak aloud. But in his heart, the war ends tonight.